Alright, so we've got the pocket bag lined up at the top of the skirt. You've got your 2 notches, which is the opening or the mouth, okay, and then you are going to sew just this oblong, so it's where the mouth begins, just normal straight stitch, slightly longer than this sewing machine, about number 3, backwards and forwards to secure your stitches. Alright, and you're just going that, whatever your seam allowance is. So if you're wanting 1.5 seam allowance, you come across 1.5. If you're doing 1, then you just come across 1. Then pivot it at your 90 degrees. Make sure you line up on your seam allowance. Okay, and so this has to be accurate, because if you don't use the correct seam allowance, then obviously when you sew the zip in, or on the other side, or join the seam, then you'll have issues. So you come down where your notch is, and then if you need to do an extra stitch, right angle, come across and sew it, and backwards and forwards. And then once we've done that, we do that all important snip, just like a welt pocket, where we're cutting at an angle right up without cutting the stitches themselves. Do that on both sides, so that enables it to be bagged out. Alright, and then you'll press it. You could understitch it if you wanted to. So if you were going to understitch it, you would just do the understitching on the pocket bag itself. Don't go right near the top. It's optional, it doesn't necessarily need it. It would depend on the fabrics, whether it would need an understitch tucked in or not. So on the lining side of the pocket, just along that straight edge, and then you'll need to turn that round. That, you know, that enables it to roll, and obviously where you've snipped it, that enables that to fold. So you've got that bit bagged out, and that should now be your seam allowance, and then the pocket mouth will open. That up, and you can see when I press that has now got a step, and that has formed the front. So this is the front of your garment, so that would be my left hand side, because obviously it's got the zips always on the left, and we'll press that, and that's that one side, and then we'll move on to the next bit in a minute. If I pause that, I'll stop it. Okay. Yeah. So once we've got our pressed pocket bag sewn, and we've got that nice step, make sure you fold it so that it's all stepped out. You're going to deal with the pocket bags. To do it as a French seam, you want to put, normally we put right sides together, so we put wrong sides together, and we're just sewing the pocket bag curve. We're not touching the side seam or the waist seam, we're just doing the pocket bag curve.
I have it wrong side together though, mine it's
So to sew a French seam, you still want to use your 1.5 centimetre seam allowance approximately. So we sew 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch first, and this will put the seam on the outside. If your pocket bags don't quite match, don't stress about it. It's the only time that I will say that. It will just, make them so that they lay flat on the garment rather than distorting the pocket bag so it doesn't sit flat on the garment. Just trim it down accordingly. Pocket bags just have a habit of moving a bit, and like these haven't been cut out very well, so they're a bit stepped, but by doing the French seam we'll be able to trim it all down. So it's just the pocket bag, just make sure that the garment's tucked out the way, and we're just dealing with the curved edge of the pocket bag. So we've just gone round the curved edge of the pocket bag. And that just goes up to the waist seam. So then we've got to trim it down, because with the French seams it's normally quite fine, but they do this in denim as well. It just makes a stronger pocket, because you put a lot of keys and things. It's all about strength. So this instance with the French seam, it's a strength seam, and when you trim that down all the way around, halfway, go all the way around, and then when you do your French seam, then you put your right sides together, roll that on the edge, and then you sew it with your 1/4 inch seam, making sure you catch the raw edges and they're contained inside. So when you're sewing your French seam on your pocket bag, just make sure that you keep the top edge open. You're still on the French seam, just going to sew round the edge of the pocket bag. Alright, and in doing it this way, it enables you to be able to then continue and put a zip in the seam, because that side seam is now just a normal side seam, and then you can put zips and sew it up, but you make sure that you keep that opening clear.